Okay, I think we're live. We have a few more people joining, so. All right, guys. Good morning, everyone. This is Harjeet. You guys are watching me in Business Analyst in Demand, either on Facebook or YouTube. And again, if you'd like to join us live, join me on Zoom. Okay, thank you. If you'd like to join me live, join me in Zoom, on Zoom actually. If you have questions at any given time, let me know if you're on Zoom. If you're asking me questions on Facebook during this session, I'm not able to get to them, unfortunately, but I will respond to your questions or comments after the training. So with that, let's get started. We are continuing with Agile because Agile is the new way of implementing IT projects. So again, some of my training, are you guys able to hear me okay? Just want to make sure before I go too far.
Yes,
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So again, we're doing Agile project management. We're building IT systems, products, solutions. So what I'd like to do is when we're talking about the daily Scrum, which is the topic for today, I'd like to compare it with Waterfall just because Waterfall has a much more structured approach of developing projects, and Agile follows the same structure, but it's in smaller increments, and it's very highly um, iterative, meaning that smaller chunks happen in smaller pieces, but the fact that we're following the same process, it gets very confusing very fast for some people. So that's why what I'd like to do is I like to explain the concept to you guys in Waterfall, and then we'll talk about Agile. And again, if you guys have any questions, please let me know. Sounds like a good deal? Okay, so daily Scrum. So the daily stand-up typically is done every day on Agile projects. It's supposed to be 10 to 15 minutes in duration. And the goal is to get daily status, right, from your team members on what you're doing. So the concept sounds very, very easy. On the waterfall environment, typically as business analysts, which you guys are striving to be, you're typically very, very engaged in the analysis phase, right? So in Waterfall, you have planning, analysis, design, then development, and then you typically go into testing, right? So these are the typical standards or phases that you follow with Waterfall. In that, business analysts are highly, highly engaged in the analysis phase, which is where they're trying to work with their stakeholders to gather requirements, right? So typically in the analysis phase, business analysts are highly engaged. We have lots of meetings. We're doing lots of documentation. We're meeting with stakeholders, many, many different stakeholders. Anybody that's impacted on your project is called a stakeholder. And therefore, you're meeting with those guys and making sure that you've collected all the requirements and that you've validated all the requirements. But typically, once you've validated your requirements and you have sign off, there's not a whole lot of meetings that you're having until you start getting into the testing phase. And typically business analysts also coordinate testing as well. And then you'll start to have lots of meetings and lots of interaction during testing as well. So this is typically the engagement that we'll see in the waterfall environment, right? In Agile, because we have our daily Scrum, which is 10 to 15 minutes in duration throughout your project or throughout your sprint. So sprints are typically 2 weeks long or 4 weeks long, depending on your project team and what you guys have decided. So typically your sprints are 2 to 4 weeks long. You will have a daily Scrum or a daily stand-up every day for 10 to 15 minutes. And the goal of that daily Scrum or the daily stand-up is so you can check in with your team and make sure that they're moving along and making progress on everything that we have on the sprint backlog. So I'll pause right there and see if you guys have any questions for me. Okay, so typically business analysts transition into the Scrum Master role in Agile, right? It's a role which you'll be, working with your product owner to develop user stories, to help your product owner to, gather requirements from stakeholders. It's a role where you'll be interacting with your project team to make sure that they don't have any roadblocks, right? So as we talked about in maybe last week's meeting or the week before, our team consists of in Agile, our team consists of a product owner, a Scrum Master, we have developers, we have designers, UX designers on the team, as well as QA folks. Now, teams could look different from organization to organization, but typically these are the roles. You can't really have an Agile project team without at least a product owner, a Scrum Master, developers, and QA folks. Lots of teams don't have UX designers. Lots of teams do have them, but again, these are the main roles that you want to have as an Agile team. So the goal of the daily stand-up is to make sure that you go around the room to each and every individual on the team and ask them 2 to 3 questions only. So typically, what you want to know from them is say, what did you do yesterday? What was accomplished yesterday? What is your plan for today? And are there any roadblocks in making sure that what you have planned for today or what you had planned for yesterday, you could not accomplish, right? And in doing so, you are finding out if there's any roadblocks that the programmers may have in getting programming or coding completed, which they planned on doing, right? As well as our QA folks. So for example, if our developers could not code a piece of functionality that our QA folks today were supposed to test, then that's a roadblock to our QA folks, right? Because they're not able to test what our developer was supposed to hand over. So in doing these daily stand-ups, you're able to identify things that could go wrong on a project really, really quickly and find corrective action, right? So that's the whole goal of having a daily check-in with your team, 10 to 15 minutes only, to find out what it is that your project team or your project in general is having issues with. Does that make sense, you guys?
Yes, it is.
Any
It
questions?
is well done.
Yep. Any questions so far?
No question yet.
Okay, perfect. So one other thing that I'd like to talk about, that's the topic for today. I like to keep these trainings short and sweet so that you guys, I don't kind of overwhelm you with information. Each week we will pick a different topic to talk about, and we'll do Agile for about a few more weeks because there's so many different topics that we could talk about under Agile. So lots of people ask me like, what are some of the roadblocks that you could see on a project team or what I've seen? Typically, as I like to say that our programmers, so typically our Scrum Masters are people like us, right? They're go-getters. They know how to navigate the organization. They know how to, talk and get access to things. So our developers, typically they're very, very technical, but and if I'm offending anybody, I don't mean to do this, personally, but typically our developers are not savvy in, talking to people or getting access to things. So typically I've seen my developers hate to be on the phone call with like the help desk if they need access for something. So if they would rather code, and work on their project and make progress so they don't have to put in long hours if they're falling behind. So lots of times I've seen with my developers, they'll say, Sarabjit, I just don't have the time, or I don't want to talk to these people to give me access. So I've helped my developers if they're running into issues, in terms of needing access to something. I've helped them, call the help desk for them or send emails to management to get them access to something. For our QA folks, if so these are some of the things that you as a Scrum Master can help them. But it generally what it takes is having a person in the room that's connecting the dots, right? Because most of your team, right, they are wanting to make progress and remove roadblocks on their own, but sometimes it takes, like lots of times I'm in meetings and our QA folks will say, this is the issue that we're facing. Like one of our developers just yesterday, last week said, I cannot test because the environment is not set up. And so the question was like, okay, Ramon, who sets up this environment? Who do I need to go talk to in the organization so you have what you need to start testing, right? And they generally know who that person is. So for whatever reason, if they're not making those connections, you as a Scrum Master are there to do that for them. And usually all it takes is sending out emails, phone calls, and just connecting those dots so that your team is not standing still and just making constant progress towards what it is that we as a team have committed to. Does that make sense, you guys?
Yes, yeah. Thank you.
No worries.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions on the topic of your daily stand-up? Usually you'll also find people, again, you want to time box it, right? Only 10 to 15 minutes. If you find people as you're giving status that go on forever, and we all know people that just like to hear themselves, you have to cut it off. As a Scrum Master, you don't want to waste the team's time. You don't want to have a daily stand-up that's for an hour. You're wasting time, not only your time, but your entire team's time. So if there's longer discussions that need to be held, and just say, we'll take it offline, I'll give you a call, let's keep moving on, right? You just want to go across the team and make sure that everybody is heard, and making great progress. There are no roadblocks, and you want to keep moving forward. So that's the last item that I wanted to talk about for the daily Scrum. All right, guys, anything else?
I have a question.
Yep.
So in Agile, BA works as a Scrum Master. That's right?
Typically, yes.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So typically in Agile, you don't have a role of a business analyst. So typically BAs transition into the Scrum Master role. BAs can transition into a product owner role if they understand the business well enough, right?
Okay.
But typically I've seen BAs transition into the Scrum Master role.
Thank you.
No worries. Okay, guys, anything else?
Just very quick question, please, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So in terms of like a role, a stage up, so would you say like the next step up from a business analyst is a Scrum Master?
So business analyst, you're talking about like in the Waterfall environment, Scrum Master is in the Agile environment. So I would say there are similar roles in two different project environments.
Okay.
But if you're working as a business analyst in the Waterfall, typically your next role would be like a project lead, project manager, program manager. In Agile, we don't have these roles necessarily. We have, scrums of scrums, so teams of Agile. So in Agile, you could, if you're working as a Scrum Master and you feel confident, you could become, start managing more than one Agile team, and then progress your career that way.
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, any other questions? All right, guys, thank you. Again, if you think of anything else later, please post it in our group and I'll get back to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day. Thanks.
I'll see you later. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.